Almost screwed up there and played the song again. Hey, everybody,
Hey.
we're back. We're back. Welcome to Law and Order. I don't know, episode 4 or 5 or something. We got a great show. Me, attorney Ryan Mullally. I now know how to pronounce your name since I had to figure it out for Word War. So we did that 5 episodes in, and I finally think I got your name right. But we got a good show lined up for you tonight. We're going to talk about some of the stuff we see in Minnesota. But before that, we're going to talk about Ryan's huge debate win over at Word War Debate against Pisco on a subject that we've talked to at least 2 episodes here. So timely, not just that it's the first episode since Word War, but a topic we've talked about, which is birthright citizenship. So Ryan, thanks for being here. How you doing today?
I'm feeling good. Now the 2-time champ. I should get another belt to put on the shelf after demolishing Pisco in yet another debate. So feeling pretty good about it. And I think it was like a pretty overwhelming margin, if I recall correctly. It was like 75-25 in the audience vote. And for those of you who tuned in and you know how the audience vote goes, anyone online could vote. All you had to do was log in and vote. That's it, right? So I was feeling a little nervous about that. I'm not going to lie, Rob, because I've got 600 subs on YouTube. Pisco's got 26,000 subs on YouTube. So he's got a 50x advantage in voting, and still. So I think that, I think the arguments that we laid out on the show that we talked about with, on my channel, we spent a lot of time talking about this. I think they're good arguments. And I think, quite frankly, Pisco kind of struggled with them a little bit. So I think the people saw that there's a real argument here. There's a real reason to think that we don't need to let people take advantage of us the way we're getting taken advantage of.
So I'll start by saying this. I thought it was the debate of the night. I thought that it was the only debate that saw really 2 debaters that are on like a similar level. The second debate with Michael and Shabbos was fine, but it was 2 completely different debate styles, and it just didn't clash well. And then the debate with Pearl and Anna, left a lot to be desired, I guess we'll say, to put politely. But yeah, so I thought both you and Pisco did great in keeping it entertaining and keeping it spirited. But my impression of it, I haven't talked about this publicly. My impression of it was I thought you won pretty handedly, in my opinion. And we could talk about the reasons why. But the voting, I thought you would lose. And the reason I thought you would lose was it wasn't a blowout in your portion. And Pisco tends to have a bigger audience too. And this is also not an insult to Pisco, to credit to him. He has a very lively audience. So, like, you see him get a lot of interactions on places like X and other social media places. So I thought, hey, he'll probably have a lot of people tuning in. Now, the crowd was definitely on your side there, but there wasn't enough people to really sway that much. And I'm just going to be honest, I was having trouble actually getting on to vote there live because there was so much problems with the internet there. So I would actually be interested to see, because, one of the arguments that you're going to hear is, well, the crowd was in Ryan's favor. It was a right-wing thing. Maybe so, but I don't think they voted much because it was so hard to get on the internet. Plus, it was probably easier back home to get the instructions on how to vote than being there in person. So given that, I thought that the odds were in his favor when it came to the online voting populace. And we haven't talked about it yet, but I know that it's something me and you have talked about. In the following 2 debates, the more like MAGA side lost. And so it's very interesting. I think that it was, pretty good evidence that the audience legitimately thought you won. And it wasn't just, well, you got more followers, or it was all right wingers. So,
well, I mean, look, I always feel good about a debate when the person I'm debating has to go into like absolute cope mode afterwards. So it's like, I'm bad faith, I'm biased, blah, blah, blah. The audience is voting wrong. They're right wing. Yeah, the nice Jewish kid who was arguing in favor of Israel, he won because the MAGA crowd, thought, oh, they're so biased towards, nice Jewish kids who support Israel. And then Pearl Davis, who was arguing that feminism's bad. And by the way, the audience loved Pearl. Yep. They were cheering for her all night. They loved Pearl. Anna Kasparian crushed in that last debate. So I think the bias claim is nonsense. I think that what honestly happened in that debate, which is funny, and it's really funny because I'll give you this context. We had that hype stream. We did a little promo, and we had Pisco on, and we played a clip in which it was revealed that Pisco had been sending one of his audience members into my stream to learn my debate tactics, to hear my arguments in advance. And yet he didn't seem to know what they were, because I think he wanted to have this debate about hypotheticals and like, well, what about this? What about this? Let's have this like armchair philosophy game. And my argument was much more, no, like the history's on my side. Let's look at the facts. Let's just talk facts the whole time. And
Well,
he didn't seem ready for that, which was odd considering he was spying on me.
so there's two things. I think that Pisco's probably used to arguing this with someone like me that would be not an attorney, right? And so a layperson looking at this case would say something like this: look, birther tourism's ridiculous. It's too much, you know. But as you correctly pointed out, that's not going to be really the way the Supreme Court's looking at this, because the justices that are going to be needed, that would be the swing votes in order to rule in Trump's favor, they're going to be originalist, and they're not looking at they're not looking at like, well, did this end up poorly? They're just looking like, what was the intent of the law when it was created? And if that 200 years later or whatever, 100 years later ends up with some bad things, then they would say, oh, well, change the law. That's not our job as justices. We're just interpreting. And I think Pisco's probably more used to arguing with someone that's just like talking about, well, the outcomes of the law. And so he could point a little more to like, well, what was the original intent and hypotheticals surrounding that. But where he failed was he didn't understand that you were going to be doing your work there as well. And you had a lot of quotes from lawmakers of the time, right? Which was unique because that's Pisco's go-to. What did they mean at the time? Well, you had the actual quotes from the lawmakers saying, look, they did have this broader interpretation of what in the jurisdiction thereof means. And I don't think he was ready for that. He instead pivoted to, well, what would that mean hypothetically? But ironically, that gets back into this sort of layman perspective like me, saying, but look what bad shit came of this. Yeah, that might be true. Bad things could happen in hypothetical scenarios. And yet, if we're only interested in what the people who wrote the law said, it's quite clear that at least, unless he has a counter that he's citing different people, the lawmakers that you were referencing were quite clear that they agreed more with your interpretation.
Well, and I think that you can see how this played out in the first minutes of the opening section after we did our openings, right? Because Pisco starts with the question, like, what does jurisdiction mean in the 14th Amendment? Which obviously, I think we all knew he was going to ask that question. We all kind of thought that was going to happen. And I had a Supreme Court case locked and loaded, ready to go. But then he said he had referenced his opening. What does Black's Law Dictionary say about it? And to your point, Rob, Henry Campbell Black, the author of Black's Law Dictionary, said that if you're only here temporarily, you don't get birthright citizenship. And he wrote that in 1910, like right around the time of the 14th Amendment. So that was very clear amongst legal scholars at the time that if you were only here temporarily, you did not benefit from this. This was not for you. And the temporary thing is really the point. Like when people complain, as Judge Posner does, about having these businesses in Asia where they send women over and they pay exorbitant sums, they get tourist visas. Sometimes they go, by the way, to territories, like not to U.S. mainland, but they go to territories where it's easier to get a visa, right? They have kids there, and then they come back to China, raise them, and then the kid can be a citizen anytime they want. That's a temporary visit. If we can stop that, that would be great. I know one of my chatters sent me an article in Breitbart where they were saying that, like, in a few years, the first crop of Chinese voters is going to be a voting age. So suddenly you're going to be able to have, if they want to, an enormous amount of Chinese citizens who can come over and vote in American elections. That's going to be a thing in the next 5 or 6 years. So this is not a hypothetical. It's a real problem. And if we have a solution, if the solution's as simple as, we're not giving you a citizenship for that. Right. You're scamming us. You're obviously scamming us. I don't think this is a hard call morally, and thankfully it's not a tough call legally.
So I thought the two arguments, the best argument that I thought Pisco had against you, and we'll see if you want to articulate it a little more, one had to do with the idea of slavery. Mm-hmm. And that is, if we forcibly take someone from, say, a country in Africa, like let's just say Zimbabwe, and a boat goes over there, forcibly takes people and brings them over here, and now they're stuck here, right? According to your interpretations, a foreigner that would come here temporarily would not meet subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So why would it be? And your answer, obviously it's in a time crunch, but your answer is like, well, it's just different if we force someone over, rather than if they come over voluntarily and like break our laws or whatever. Those are two different things. But why? I think the Pisco has an argument there. And so can you articulate further on that? Why that, like, sort of explain the argument, what you're talking about, people that come over from foreign that's not subject to the jurisdiction there, and why being forcibly brought over changes that equation.
And if people do public debates, by the way, Rob talks about this all the time. You got to remember why you're doing the debate.
Right.
So this question that Pisco asked me is actually, that's a very hard question. It is the hardest question I could be asked. And there's levels of nuance to the answer you could give, right? The problem is, in that format, we have this tight time frame. If I give a super nuanced answer to this, then I'm playing defense for the entire debate.
Correct.
So that's not going to happen. Like, I have to give a pithy answer that's correct, but lets me move on. So that's what I did, which was, it's fundamentally different if someone's taken here versus coming here illegally. To put a little more flesh on the bones of that, there's two main responses. The first is, when you talk about someone coming here illegally and whether or not their children should be given birthright citizenship, we're talking about whether they did something illegal, not whether something illegal was done to them, right? So that's I think, a pretty clear distinction. The second one is, and this is the defensive point I didn't want to get into in like that format of debate. Trump's executive order actually does two things. It says no birthright citizenship if the mother's here temporarily and the father has no status, or illegally and the father has no status. The arguments for temporary are much better than the arguments for illegal. Much better. I would be unsurprised if Trump wins on temporary and loses on illegal at the Supreme Court level. I think that there's a big difference. Now, if you look at the slave example, the illegal slave importation, they apply very differently, right? Like, could you make an argument, as Pisco did, that the slaves imported on the black market were here illegally? Yes. But were they here temporarily? Obviously not. They were here for life, right? So under the temporary prong, it comes out differently. So, but again, I think that on that sort of stage, I would not want to get into a defensive point like that. But I think that's how it actually would be analyzed by the court.
And this is something I don't know the answer to this, but this might be interesting to see. I just don't know. One of the things you talked about on my channel, and you did talk about in the debate, was sort of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And one of the tests that they were using was like the draft, like during the Civil War. Could you be drafted? And so just to, hopefully I steelman your position here, but something to do with this, right? Are you a citizen if you were born here? Okay, according to Pisco or the left's interpretation, sure you are. So then we had the Civil War, and you had a bunch of people from like foreign countries that were here. They're seemingly, based on the left's definition, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the laws, right? Like you can't do all kinds of, you have to pay taxes, this, that, and the other. And yet when it came time for the draft, they were like, whoa, no, wait a minute, I'm a French citizen. I'm a Spanish citizen. I can't be drafted here, right? In that vein, I wonder what the answer would have been of slaves. Like, if you're a freed slave, right, and you haven't incurred any benefit, like, from the U.S. government or anything like that could you say if they tried to draft you? No. I don't pay fealty to the United States. I was brought here against my will. I choose to not be a citizen of this country. I can't get money to go back to my country. I was brought here unjustly. And so, back then it would be very difficult to get a ship or whatever to go back. I don't know. Is that something that ever came up that,
Not to my knowledge, because it's so, you think about somebody who's here, like their family was taken here, obviously slavery in this horrible way, but they've been here 5 or 6 generations and then they're freed. And what are they going to do? Like, they're good. Like the idea is like, oh, we can't draft him, but like this prince in Africa, he can draft him. They never even been there. Like, and to your point, they'll never go there. Like in terms of political allegiance, it's very clear who they owe allegiance to at that point. And And political allegiance is not entirely voluntary. The thing about the draft that made it voluntary was that, some of these people were French. They were French citizens, and then it is a fair question like, hey, do you want to be American? Are you trying to be American? Because if so, you owe us your military service. But if you're French and you're just here doing business, yeah, we can't draft you. We know this is true. So I think that the freed slaves from kind of like the original transatlantic slave trade is an easier issue. The really hard one that Pisco raised is the importation of slaves after the importation of slaves was outlawed.
Correct.
Because it's late. It's both later in time and it's illegal. So that's a much harder fact. But on the flip side, it's not like there aren't hard facts for the other theory, right? Like beyond the history that we've talked about, this came up in the debate where Pisco was saying like, well, Native Americans aren't subject to the jurisdiction, even though we can arrest them if they rob a bank because they're an exception. And it's like, well, under your theory, they're an exception. Under my theory, they're just extensions of the rule. Like we don't have complete jurisdiction over them. Why not? Because they have their own sovereignty. It's like we can't draft them because they're not fully American. We understand this. We know, and I think that when you have a theory that has less exceptions, that's probably a better theory, right?
Yeah, I agree totally. The other point, and I saw people were sort of lighting you up for this online, was when you were asked specifically what your definition of jurisdiction was, you said like complete jurisdiction or total jurisdiction. And they were like, you used the word in the definition of the word. Now, my interpretation of what you were saying was as follows. Pisco, we basically agree on what jurisdiction means. What we're arguing is, what does it mean in this context? And in this context, we agree that jurisdiction means like sort of having power, legal power over, right? But this means having total legal power in this particular sentence. What do you say to the people that say that you copped out by not giving an actual definition of the term jurisdiction?
I mean, first of all, just to go back to the tactics point before we do the substance, this is the Douglas Murray quote that I love, is that in a debate, sometimes if you start doing definitions, you'll do nothing else.
Right.
I had the affirmative position. So my win condition is to convince the audience that I'm right and to tell a story. Pisco has the negative position. So his win condition is to draw the debate into a morass where no one learns anything and it becomes very confusing, right? That because he wins by default on the draw. And I will say, to Pisco's credit, he's extraordinarily good at that. He will drag a conversation into the mud and it just becomes this like super, super difficult to slog through exercise that I think I lose by default if I let him do that. So I can't let him do that. That's just like on a tactical level. On a what makes the question tricky is that jurisdiction, as the Supreme Court has said, and I quoted them, is a word that has like 100 meanings. Do you mean territorial jurisdiction, which means at all subject to the laws, which is what Pisco's arguing? Do you mean complete jurisdiction, which means that you have all the obligations and rights that come with citizenship or are analogous or fairly analogous to citizenship, like a green card holder? Do you mean personal jurisdiction, like a court needs for a lawsuit? Do you mean subject matter jurisdiction, which you need to get to federal court instead of state court? Like, it's a word that can be used a lot of ways. So there's no way to settle on a definition in the abstract, because it has many meanings.
Yeah, I debated Pisco probably 7 hours on the definition of jurisdiction one time. And if I've learned one thing from it, it was there's seemingly endless ways that, and even if you limit it to just the court, like I went through decision after decision after decision where it seems like Supreme Court itself or lower courts are using the word jurisdiction in sometimes almost antithetical ways from one decision to another.
The quote I gave from Justice Ginsburg was that jurisdiction is a word of too many meanings. And that's the Supreme Court, because they which is, by the way, that's why it was a great question from Pisco. I anticipated it, but it's a sharp question because it doesn't look like a trap question, but it is a trap question because jurisdiction has too many meanings. But the actual topic for the 14th Amendment isn't what does the word jurisdiction standing alone mean? The topic is, what does the term of art in the Constitution, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, what does that mean, right? And the answer to that question is, well, I had the quotes from the people who wrote it. It means subject to the complete jurisdiction thereof. I had the quote from the scholars of the time period. It means subject to the complete jurisdiction thereof. And what does complete jurisdiction mean? It means political allegiance. That's what if you have political allegiance, you are subject to the complete jurisdiction. So there is a clean answer. And I actually gave the clean answer. You know,
yeah, I agree. I agree.
It sounded complete jurisdiction equals political allegiance, but I couldn't let the conversation go down that rabbit hole off the bat, because then half an hour later, I haven't made a single point.
Yeah, and like, here's the thing, and I think, look, I enjoyed thoroughly the people on our analysis decks. I know Sam and Gavin are both hilarious. Kyla was complete professional, was absolutely wonderful to hang around with there. Like, but I think that you could tell if you went back and watched, they were a little lost in the debate. And I think that a lot of people that weren't following very closely, this might be tough to like sink your teeth in. Now, I was able to follow it a little more for two reasons. One, because I just have a tendency to look a little more in these court cases than maybe the average person. And second, because I talked to both you and Pisco on this subject. So I sort of knew what to expect going into the debate. But I understand why someone just listening will be like, well, you asked the definition of a word and you gave the word in the definition. You must be losing. But it's like, I saw a clear picture of what was going on, which was, even if we accept that, even if we just look at the word jurisdiction in a box, seeing as how you're arguing without any pushback that, yeah, there's multiple meanings of this word, what we should do is prefer the meaning of the people that wrote the law, which you're the only one citing. You're like, this is exactly what they meant here. So it's sort of irrelevant, like, to go into like, well, here's the 100 possible definitions of what jurisdiction, or here's exactly what it means, right? Like, for example, if a law is passed that says, you know, the United States should substantially reduce greenhouse gases, right? Me and you and 1,000 other people might have 1,000 different definitions of substantial. But if the people that wrote the law said, and oh, by the way, by substantial, we mean exactly 20%. That's the end of the debate, right? It's like, okay, that's what they meant. They have clarified it. That's in effect what you were doing. You're like, look, we could argue till we're blue in the face. There's so many. Here's literally what the people that crafted the law said they meant, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So I was not lost, nor did I think it was like, oh, this is Ryan being Weasley, that he used the word jurisdiction in the definition of jurisdiction. I knew exactly what was happening. You were like, look, there's a lot of definitions. We're sticking to the facts. This is exactly what the people that created the law said it means.
Well, and I know your audience is big into like the kind of like the meta of debate. So I think this is an important point to make. If you see someone like Rob or someone like me have like a 3, 4, 5, in Rob's case, 7-hour discussion with Pisco, where we just go endlessly into the weeds on a topic, right? That's because it's a conversation on stream. It's good content. You might learn something out of it, and there's no time limit. It's fun. You kind of get into it. I'm happy to have those conversations in that style, because that's what the format's all about, right? There's no judge. There's no time limit. But when you're actually in a formal debate, and for those of you in the audience who want to do this, adding to Rob's point about asking yourself why you're debating, as a lawyer, the thing you always have to ask is, who am I attempting to persuade? Is it the jury? Is it the judge? Who am I talking to, right? And in this case, I was attempting to persuade the voting audience. That was who the judge was. Now, if I spend 20 minutes on hyper-technical legalese about legal definitions and the various merits of them, have I persuaded a soul? Not one. I don't think I would persuade one person, because they don't, like you said, even the announcers who were paying close attention weren't following the legalese. So, for me, especially if you have the affirmative in a debate and you have to carry the burden of persuasion, you have to know what actually moves the needle and what doesn't, right? So let's say we spent 30 minutes and I had this beautiful hyper legal technical argument in which I laid out complete jurisdiction and we had a million case citations, and I think I did a great job. I bet I lose the debate. I bet I lose the debate because everyone tunes out and no one votes.
Yep.
right? You got to know who your audience is and who you're persuading.
And
right?
that's just it. That like, and I think Pisco knew that as well, right? That like, because we had all three talked about this, like full disclosure, that it's like it's different to debate in front of a jury versus in front of a judge, versus in front of like maybe you're doing this debate at a law school and all of the people that are going to be judging are law students. That's different than you're debating for a general audience that may include some people in the legal profession, but mostly will include lay people. And so you need to be able to be honest. You don't want to cheat and just be like, I know these people don't know these nuances, so I'll lie. You don't want to do that, but you want to make the point in a way. And it's a good lesson even outside the scope of debate, right? You could be the smartest person in the world, but if you're incapable of imparting that message to other people, a lot of times it doesn't do you much good, right? And so you need to be able. And so, yeah, I thought that I was neutral before the debate. I thought that it was a competitive debate. Don't get me wrong. I thought you won in my estimation pretty clearly, but I thought it was competitive. And in my head beforehand, I thought Ryan has the edge because I think Ryan's capable of talking to lay people better than Pisco. I think Pisco gets in these hyper semantic legalese arguments where you continue to go down and down and down these rabbit holes to right where, and I think that, like you said, a lot of people are just like, Now on the negative, that benefits you to some degree, but ultimately I think what happens is you were able to have a clear case. And I saw our friend Old Joe said in the chat, rhetorically, one of the most devastating moments of the debates when he cites black law. And you're like, yeah, let's see what Blacks himself said. I mean, that's pretty rough. And look, Pisco does something clever, right? He tries to get out of that, right? He's like, well, it's just one person. Who cares? And moving on. And to which your answer is like, I agree. That's why I'm citing the actual lawmakers. And then he just tries to shift it somewhere else because he knew that was a really bad look. Like when the very, and you can see it coming a mile away if you understand debate. So as soon as I see you like, oh, really, Black, that's interesting. Now, we're both attorneys, we know this, but can you talk a little about why this is like sort of the Bible of like legal definition? Can you talk? Oh, yes. And Pisco's more than happy to talk about how impressive Black's Law Dictionary is. And then you're like, what's interesting? Because, and I knew it was coming. I was like, uh-oh. You might now. I didn't know you'd have a quote from him himself, but I assumed like you'd be like, "Well, in version 3 it said this." But once you had a quote from the man himself, it's like, "Whoo, that's pretty tough to come back from,"
Well, it was a great moment. It was a great moment, and it was also like I got to shout out my chat because when we were, Amy Swearer, the Heritage Foundation lawyer who really developed most of the arguments that I was using, and she, by the way, is getting her moment of shine because in Ted Cruz's amicus brief at the Supreme Court level, he quotes her all the time. So she's having a real moment right now. But she was the one who found this quote from Henry Campbell Black. And when we saw it in the article and in the interview her gave, my chat was like, holy shit. Because we all knew Pisco cites Black's Law Dictionary in every debate. Like he does it.
Which, by the way, is not a bad thing to do. I don't think
most people cite Black's Law Dictionary. Yeah. But I and then the question is, do you front load it or do you let him? Do you let him
say it? Right. You let him do it.
You let him say it.
That's high level debating, right? That's strategizing, and sometimes it's doable in these sorts of debates, but in the style debate I did, policy debate, this was the sort of stuff we'd talk about all the time, right? Like goad them into saying something, right? To citing a source so you could be like, interesting, right? So like if you're capable of doing that, because had you cited Black first, he would have just been like, well, it's not impressive and that's just one dictionary and blah, blah, blah. But when he talks it up first, and then you're like, okay, right? So you take a risk because if he never brings it up, well, then you don't get to say it really, or it doesn't have the same impact. But yeah, very well done.
Well, but it also means, just for those of you who are just love debate and the meta of it, it means that style of prep is harder.
Yeah.
Right? Like in order to do what I did, I had to have a mastery of a set of historical facts and the flexibility to use them in context. Right? If you want to, you can't go in with like 2 points on an outline and just hammer those 2 points. It's a demanding style, right? So I was glad it worked out. I prepped my ass off. I feel like it turned out well. And the only other thing I'm going to say is I understand that like some people are going to misinterpret what I'm saying here and be like, oh, well, why wouldn't you feel like you need to articulate it in the way like you're talking to a judge just because there's a layperson audience. And I think you need to understand what the business of law is to understand how crazy that is. Like, let's imagine Rob gets arrested for a crime, right? Rob would never be arrested for a crime, but let's say he was, right? And he's in court, and it's a trial now. There's a jury, and we're deciding whether Rob gets to be a free man or not, right? And I get up there and I make my argument, and I come back to the table, and Rob goes, "What the fuck was that? That was hyper-technical legalese. The jurors fell asleep. Nobody knows what the fuck you're talking about. What are you doing?" And I go, "Rob, at least I tried to convince the judge who doesn't decide the question." You know, like it's great. Like the first rule of persuasion is know who your audience is and speak to your audience. That doesn't mean, to Rob said this earlier, that doesn't mean you lie. That doesn't mean you say anything that's not true. It's actually quite difficult because it means you have to take something complicated and simplify it without losing the essence. But if you don't do that, you will lose every time. And the best defense attorneys I've ever seen are masters of this. They take a story that's legally complicated and they simplify it and they make it a jury story and they tell the jury this story. And that's why their clients walk free, because they understand how to convince a jury of your peers. And that is a legal skill. It's a different legal skill. It's not writing a brief, but it's an important one.
So reminder, if you get super chats in on either Ryan or mine's channel, we will read them if they're relevant. This one is Aftermath Official. Thanks so much. Was one of the people that asked a question afterwards for $5 says, as Pisco Word War, why is ignoring the fact that foreigners are taking advantage of the system and all I got was word salad? Yes. It wasn't germane so much to the debate as it was, because we're sort of talking about the intent of the framers of the law. But yeah, I believe that from a political matter, Pisco's fine with this. He wants, and a lot of the Democrats are, they're actually fine with the current system and with sort of what us on the right might say being taken advantage of. They say, no, it's a good thing. So it's not taking advantage of because it's beneficial to the country. Like, do you have an opinion on that? Of like that Pisco didn't have a good answer to like sort of birther tourism as a question?
He didn't even attempt an answer.
Right.
In the whole debate, he never said morally we shouldn't do this. He only made legal arguments, and I think morally it's obvious we should. Like, there really isn't a counter argument. And I know this is a little inside baseball, but like the night before, we changed the format. So I was going to have a slide deck, and then I wasn't going to use a slide deck, and it was good. I think it actually forced me to simplify. And one of the things I took out is I was going to start with this technical definition of jurisdiction, and I cut it because I couldn't put it on screen to walk people through it. And instead I started with that, which is like, morally, we should do this. And I think that like that is for most people the most compelling question. Like, we ought to fix this problem because it's a real problem. And I've never even heard a counter argument. The Wick tried one. I talked with Wick about birthright tourism. His argument was, it was really funny. He tried to do the declining birth rate thing, where he was like, well, if birth rates are declining, shouldn't we do anything we can to incentivize more people to come in? And it's like, oh, I don't know, Wick. I don't feel like that's the solution to that problem, but okay, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, and so, but yeah, that's definitely, it's something that he didn't have a compelling answer to, and most of the lefties don't. And the truth is, look, it's difficult. You have to understand, if you're playing the game of politics and you're trying to win, sometimes, like, it's going to sound shitty, but I'm just telling you the truth. A lot of times people don't want to tell you exactly what they think because they think that hurts the chance in the immediacy to win a particular race or something to that effect. I believe that many, many, many people on the left were completely fine with Joe Biden opening up the border, are completely fine with the birther tourism stuff. They just are. They're okay with it. And so they don't want to say it, though. They know that doesn't poll particularly well. So it's like, well, we just have a problem with the way the law is being enforced. And, hey, shucks, there's nothing we could do, right? We've set it up to where we're saying the legal system says, there's nothing we could do. The problem's already occurred. Now we have to move forward. And so that's my belief. So that's why you're likely to hear non-answers from people in the know. And people like Wick that maybe aren't thinking about it to that level they'll give an answer. But the truth is, I mean, I think that answer implies that someone like Wick is actually fine with further tourism. For the justification he gave. One last thing I'll say on this, and then you could obviously close out with anything you want as well, Ryan. I will say, maybe to the chagrin of my audience, but I'm just going to be honest. I had a lot of fun hanging out with you and Pisco. We hung out both a little before the debate
Mhm.
and afterwards. The same with Erudite, who was there. Everyone was completely professional. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't like people were like "F you" after the debate or anything like that. So it was an enjoyable experience, and I liked the idea of in-person debates. And technical issues aside and things like that maybe occurred, I think Pisco would say he had a good time. I think you had a good time, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. There wasn't like bloodthirsty hard feeling. Now, everything in me wanted to flip out at Pisco for his takes he was putting up on X about the next story we're going to cover, the Renee Good story, because he's like tweeting him while he's there. But I have to be neutral. But I wanted to be like, "What the fuck are you doing? What are you talking about?" But we let it aside, and it was actually a quite enjoyable evening, I thought.
It's really funny. I hope it's not breaking kayfabe. Right? First of all, thank you for including me. It was a really cool event.
You saved our ass. You
Yeah.
and Pisco saved our ass.
I was really happy to do it. I think, I said before the debate, I don't think they ran these interviews, but, they asked me before the debate, like, what do you want to say about Pisco? Like, you want to shit talk a little bit, basically. And I said, I think Pisco is the best legal debater in the online left right now. And I stand by that. I think he is the best. Now, I think I won by a pretty comfortable margin, and I think you can come to your own conclusions about what that means. But I don't, there's no animosity there. I don't dislike Pisco. I was having beers with Pisco. We get along. There's no kayfabe here. I think he's a good guy. I think his takes are fucking awful. And I've had the same experience where I'm like, man, like we had that debate, we got a couple of beers, and then I see you like talking wild shit about me on your show. Like, because he was like, he's bad faith, he's a sandbagger, that fucking guy.
I didn't see any of that
Yeah.
after the debate. Like he was commenting.
Oh
on
yeah, some of it I think is like fucking stupid too, because he said like I'm a low tier debater in his thing, and I was like, you can't call
lost
someone
twice.
a low tier debater who just beat you. That's like, because what does that make you? You got to at least say, I lost to somebody who did really well, right? But yeah. So he does that shit where like he goes into his online bag and all of a sudden he's like insufferable Pisco again. So it is what it is. What it is. I think his take on the ICE shooting is that it's like straight up murder, right? Is that where he landed?
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. So now we move on there. Now, hopefully, last thing I'll say about that, I would like to see more online or in person legal debates. I like that. You don't see a lot. And there's a lot of people in the law field that are doing videos now on the left and the right. I'd like to see some more straight up moderated debates on like hyper specific topics. What better way for a general audience to like learn about some of these cases that are going to come in front of the Supreme Court that have two competent attorneys sort of hash it out for a public audience. So, I liked it. I don't know what everyone else's feelings are. Maybe it's too jargonistic or it's too hyper specific of an area for some people. But for me, I could have watched that shit all day. I loved it. So hopefully this is if nothing else, hopefully it's a good starting off platform that we could set up more debates like that, whether it be through Word War or through other people that are setting up debates. I think it's great. Y'all should be doing attorney debates. I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
and I say that knowing I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to be in those debates, but it's awesome.
Well, and also I think for like the online debate meta, let's call it, in-person events are a big deal. It changes everything, right? Because like, when you're debating someone online, they have their notes, they have a Google window open, they might be able to, they have their AI tools, but even more importantly, they have their chat, right? And like, it's this very different beast when you're debating online because everybody has access to full information. When you're debating publicly like that in person, it's an entirely different skill set, and there's an audience there, and there's a hype to it. There's a vibe to it. It's kind of like why like you go to like a hockey game, and it's just different live. It's not the same as watching on TV, right? So I think that it's a really cool idea. I hope they do more of it. I know like Modern Day Debate has had huge success with the in-person format. Monk Debate has had huge success. So, obviously people like this format. It's just a question of fine-tuning it and making everything work out. But I think people enjoy it. And I think that you get a more entertaining show when the people are in the room. Like it has that raw live element to it.
Yep. I agree. It was good. So, all right. Well, if people have more questions about that, remember, send in super chats. We're going to move on now. The rest of the show will be about legal topics. Obviously, we could jump around a bit, but the two that we had an idea of talking about was the shooting that the woman Renee Good was actually killed in, and then the situation last night with the Don Lemon and some folks going into a church and whether or not that violates specific laws. I think it probably makes sense just chronologically. It seems, man, does our news cycle move so fast. I mean, this whole Renee Good saga takes place after our last episode.
Mhm.
So it seems like this has been in the news forever, but neither of us have really had a chance to give takes on this. Based on what you've seen, the footage, and understanding like what the law is, what's your take on this? Do you think that this was a murder? Do you think that it's up in the air and there should be an investigation and you're upset that there's not more of one? Or do you think that this was a clear case of just a law enforcement officer operating within the confines of his duties?
So I think, like most people, when I first watched the footage, I had kind of like a gut moral reaction where I was like, oh, that's bad. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to see that, and you don't want that to happen. And I think, and that hasn't changed, by the way. I think that like there were things the officer did that maybe could have been different, right? But that's not the legal answer. That's the moral answer. Legally, I think that there is a sub 2% chance that this guy would get convicted. I think it would basically need to be like some kind of like jury nullification, home cooked jury sort of thing for him to lose. I think legally he just wins for reasons that I think we can get into. So as to an investigation, I think sometimes having an investigation is helpful because it makes the public feel better. And that's a valuable reason to have an investigation. But on what we've seen, and we actually have a lot of footage, I don't think this is a particularly difficult question. Like, I think that using deadly force in that scenario is within the officer's discretion. Like, he had the right to, and he did. And I don't think if you convicted him, it would be because there was some kind of miscarriage of justice. Like, he should not be convicted for that.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I'm going to be talking about this on my show after this, and I'll probably be a little more animated. But let's start with this. I don't want to see anyone die at all in an act of violence, and this includes law enforcement both unjustly or justly using lethal force. It sucks. It really does, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Now, I know there are an awful lot of people that want to be like, hey, F around, find out, and that sort of stuff. Maybe it's okay to say that. I'm not saying you're an immoral person, but for me, I take no pleasure. I wish that this situation would have happened, and even with the firearm being discharged, I wish that it would have missed or injured and stopped her from advancing, whatever, and she wouldn't have died. From the bottom of my heart, I want that. However, I think the evidence is pretty clear-cut, and this is before the actual footage of the officer came out, which makes it even more clear-cut, as far as I'm concerned, that this officer was in reasonable fear that he was about to be ran over by a vehicle, which is a deadly weapon in the eyes of the law, a vehicle coming at you like that, and then he was justified. And I think that there's several questions that I'll ask you that I've heard people that might push back against this narrative, but for me, it's damn clear cut. And I think that if this would not have the political tones, if this would have just been a normal, someone that in a drug riddled neighborhood where the police are trying to enforce a drug law, and someone that's like friends with one of the drug dealers is trying to prevent traffic, and the exact same situation plays out, I don't think anyone would bat an eye. They'd say tragedy, but we understand the officer. For me, I think that people's political motivations and dislike of ICE and dislike of Trump and immigration enforcement is allowing them to sort of see this in a different light, where they already think ICE is villains, and so this just confirms to that.
Well, I think there's two important preliminary points that need to be made to just explain why I think this is so clear cut. The first is we have a rich history of civil disobedience in this country. Like, people sit in like the 1960s, the civil rights movement, like that's an American thing, right? But when you engage in civil disobedience, at the end of the civil disobedience, you get arrested. That's how civil disobedience ends. Because you're engaging in civil disobedience, that does not give you a license to resist arrest or to disobey officers' orders, right? So it's almost like, I hate to say this because, like, you know those like fucking idiots who handcuff themselves to the road and they do climate protests. It's like they fucking drive me crazy. But at least they know they're going to get arrested, and they understand that, like, when the officers come, you get in the paddy wagon and you go, right? Like, so she was actively attempting to flee and resist arrest at the time that she got shot, and she was using a car to do it. And in the eyes of the law, a car is a deadly weapon, right? Because it is a deadly weapon. Now, imagine it wasn't a car. Imagine it was a weapon that people, not just legally, but like intuitively see as a deadly weapon. Let's say she was carrying a machete, right? And they said, guns out, you're under arrest, stop. And her response was to charge at one of the cops with the machete. And then she gets shot. Well, obviously you're going to get shot in that situation. Obviously you're going to get shot in that situation. They're not going to let you, they're not going to see what happens. And this argument that, like, oh, well, what if she was angling to the right of the cops? So, he didn't have to shoot her because she was going to be off angle. It's like, well, imagine it was a machete. Is the officer supposed to be like, hey, I think she's going to run past me and not kill me with the machete, so I should just take that chance. I should let that happen and see how it goes. It's not how the law works, and for damn good reason. Like, at a certain point, officers have to defend themselves, and she, whether she intended to or not, was using a deadly weapon in a very dangerous way towards an officer who was attempting to arrest her. You're going to get shot in that scenario. And I would urge anyone in the audience, at the time when officers have guns out and they're saying you're under arrest, get out of the car, get out of the car. Like, let your lawyer fix this problem for you later. Like, this is not the time to flee and play hero like she did. And tragically, if you do, this sort of thing happens.
Yeah, I mean, I saw an attorney online that I follow, Shipwreck Crew. Mm-hmm. He put it this way. He used a different weapon. He said, let's say it was a gun, right? And let's say the same situation plays out, and this woman just wants to flee. Mm-hmm. Law enforcement says, that's it, you're under arrest, get out. And she pulls out the gun, and she intentionally shoots over the head, right? Points kind of towards, but over the head of the officer. Is he obligated to let her pull the trigger? And, like, then the argument is, oh, no. She was clearly just trying to escape. She was shooting over him. Of course not. Of course we'd say that's absurd. Once you realize that a vehicle is treated in that context as a deadly weapon, that's the case. I see Corey Schuler saying that this makes us bootlickers. So think of the implications of this. What you're really saying then is, and this is, if you go back to my debate with Tom Fullery in person at DebateCon at Grid Motorsports event, one of the things that upsets me is when people talk about this stuff, because it actually has real world implications that you're going to get someone hurt or killed. So Tom was saying, if I saw, plainclothes people detaining someone, I would exercise my Second Amendment right, and I would go after them with that. And I was like, that's a huge fucking mistake. Like, you can't say that shit. If people take this advice seriously, you're going to lead to people dying, and they're going to be found guilty. You can't do that. These officers are under no obligation to answer questions from you while they're in the middle of detaining. You might not like it. You could push for that law to be changed. And you may even say, I'm not a bootlicker, I would do this. That's fair, but prepare for the consequences. And the consequences are, you're probably going to get killed. And if not, you're going to go to prison. That's what's going to happen. It's the same case here. I debated over and over. I debated someone named Vegan Gaines one time on this. His advice was, if you're black and you get pulled over by law enforcement, you don't want to be a bootlicker, right? We all know law enforcement's systemically racist. So run away. Drive away of police. I say that's a huge mistake. That's a huge mistake. That's going to lead to people dying. It's going to lead to people getting lengthy prison sentences. The same's true here. I get it. A lot of you like open to borders. I get it. You don't want ICE enforcement. I understand that, right? You aggressively want the law applied when it comes to people protesting abortion clinics or people protesting elections or whatever. That's what you want, but you're real pissed off when the other side gets a mandate that comes into vote and is legally deporting people, and you don't like it. And so you think that we need to stand up and we need to fight. You have every right to protest it. You don't have the right to impede law enforcement. You don't. And once they say, that's it, you're under arrest, get out of the car. If you try to flee, especially if it's in the direction of police, you too will be considered using a lethal weapon. And that is not an unreasonable position. It is not, we do not say because we disagree with the ICE law, well then, the officers that enforce these laws ought to not detain anyone or try to detain anyone, because if people decide to flee them in vehicles, they aren't allowed to do anything. We can't do that, right? And so it's always amazing to me to see these people. I'm a bootlicker because I'm trying to say something like, yeah, don't drive towards cops that are detaining you, because I don't want to see another Renee Good. Now, I don't agree with Renee Good's politics. I don't. I don't want the woman to die, and I don't want other people to die. So this entire notion that it makes you a bootlicker from saying, like, yeah, the officer was allowed to use deadly force in this sense is nonsensical.
Well, and honestly, I don't know what she thought. Like Renee, I obviously I don't know her. I can't read her mind, but I think that there's some bad, really bad assumptions that went into what she was doing. Right? Like, first of all, there's a misconception that people think that ICE can't arrest you for traffic violations, which is true. ICE doesn't enforce traffic laws, so she's thinking, oh, I'm going to impede their progress by driving back and forth on this street. And they can't stop me because that's a traffic issue and ICE doesn't enforce traffic laws. That's true, but you're obstructing justice and they can arrest you for obstructing justice. So getting a little too cute with what you think the law is can get you in a lot of trouble. And then a lot of people, and I said this earlier, but I just want to make sure it's reinforced. A lot of people go, well, I mean, my car is not a deadly weapon. I pick up groceries. I pick up my kids in my car. It's not a deadly weapon. It's like your car absolutely is a deadly weapon. You can kill someone with your car easily. In fact, cars kill, 40,000 people a year in this country? Like, cars are definitionally deadly weapons. And if you look in the Supreme Court case Barnes, Justice Kavanaugh wrote a really interesting concurrence for people who are just thinking in this area, where he was saying, like, let's say there's a cop at a traffic stop and the guy tries to flee the traffic stop. What are the cop's options? And what are the drawbacks? And what are all the decision points? And Justice Kavanaugh walked through it. And it's very tricky, right? Like, let's say he lets the person escape, but then they're driving 100 miles an hour the wrong way down the road and they kill a bystander. Now you got an innocent kid dead. Let's say he shoots out the tires, but the car skids out and it hits somebody, right? Let's say he shoots the driver, but maybe he didn't have to shoot the driver and they could have just taken down the license plate. But let's say they take down the license plate and then it turns out that the person, hits somebody and then does a drug deal and kills 5 people with fentanyl. The cop doesn't know, and they have to make these decisions in a real short time frame. And, it's the law is going to give them protection because those decisions are impossible.
That's right.
And there's no way to do it. So
some things I totally agree. So some things to look at this, the millisecond by millisecond. Now, I find that the millisecond footage that you see actually makes the case for the officer even more. But let's say no. Let's say you're like, what I see is actually her slightly turning the wheel away. Okay, but the law is not going to factor that in. Right? The law is going to say there is no way that reasonably this officer had millisecond, now stop, now let's analyze. Okay, next millisecond, now stop. He is in the path of a vehicle moving forward after they've told this woman to stop repeatedly. Some other things real quick. We had someone say he didn't try to enforce the law. He had no intent on safety. His only intent was to escalate and kill with a bunch of exclamation points. Bad take, Rob strikes again. Not true. They repeatedly told her to get out of the vehicle. The original story told by her was, her crew was, she was just trying to do a U-turn. She got confused. Now we know that they, in fact, were there to impede ICE. So they're allowed to say, look, get out of the vehicle. You have to stop impeding ICE. They were filming because oftentimes what happens is these people do get away, and now, and rightfully so, they are trying to get good footage so that they are able to, one, have an accurate picture. By the way, this is something the left used to want, body cam footage and all this stuff, so we have a clear picture. So they're doing it for those reasons. And second, in case the person leaves, that they're able later to go arrest that person for this. What happened here is he keeps saying Ross made 0 attempts. Doesn't matter. His partner did. His partner routinely said, get out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car, right? It does not matter. Like, all of these, I'll ask you these questions in a second, but all of this is irrelevant. What she intended to do is irrelevant. What it matters is she was given a lawful order. She violated it. She started to advance in a vehicle, and the officer had a reasonable fear that he was going to be harmed by a weapon of deadly force. That's it. We don't have to seek the operation of her mind to know what she was doing. All we need to do under the law is to say, what was the officer thinking? And is it reasonable that he had a reasonable fear? And I think that it's clear cut, yes.
Well, and keep in mind, and I want to give credit where credit's due, because Laid Back Law had a panel on this on Friday that I participated in. Pisco, my buddy, was there, and Nate the lawyer and Nick Rakita made a few really good points that I think are worth reiterating here. Nick Rakita's point, which is a really good one, is that when you're talking about whether this is murder, you're saying the officer's on trial for murder, so he gets the presumption of innocence, right? It's innocent till proven guilty. So it's not, was he reasonable? It's, can the government prove that he was unreasonable, right? Like they have the burden of proof. It's a really high burden, and proving that he was unreasonable in the action he took is very difficult. Rob, I agree with you on the videos that we've seen. And Nate the lawyer made this point, which I thought was brilliant. Like Pisco was saying, it's murder, blah blah blah, whatever Pisco's point is. And at one point, Nate just stopped in the middle of the panel, goes, "Everybody run, duck, run!" And of course, everyone freezes up and nobody knows what's happening. And he says, "Well, that was way more time than the officer had to react, and none of you reacted to what just happened here. None of you, because it's such a short window, and you have to have a reaction in it. You're not playing it out in your head and trying to come up with all these 2020 hindsight scenarios. You have to make a call, and that the law is set up to protect that, because it's very difficult." And then the last one, this is another Nate point that I thought was really clever. You've probably watched these videos like 100 times. Pisco's watched these videos 100 times, right? And that's where this argument, the angle of the wheel was such that maybe he wouldn't have gotten hit, despite the fact that I think it's pretty clear he did get hit. So, but whatever. That he should reasonably have interpreted her intent based off the turn of the wheel, which is a pretty subtle point. And Nate goes, "Okay, we just watched the video 4 times." And he goes, "What color was her shirt?" Nobody knows. Nobody knew. Why did nobody knew? Because that wasn't the detail you were looking for, right? The idea that the officer was tracking exactly the angle of the wheel to the tires, to the danger to him, and he go, "Well, the car hit me, but it didn't hit me that bad. I think it's going to be okay." Like there's no way that that we can expect that it's unreasonable for an officer not to have tracked these details, even if you assume these details favor someone like Pisco's position, which, to your point, I don't think is clear. Like, no, I think the evidence tends to go the other way. But even if you think the evidence does go Pisco's direction, I think you'd still lose, right? Yep. And here's the ultimate test. I think Pisco will call this murder, sure. But if you ask Pisco, bet me $1,000 whether there's going to be a conviction in this case. Bet me $1,000. He won't bet you.
No, he knows.
He knows. He knows that this is like, there's a small chance the charges are ever brought, and if it gets brought, it's like a 1% chance of a conviction. He knows. He won't bet on this, because it's like when people say, I think Trump's going to run in 28. I'm like, I don't think so. And they're like, I'm pretty sure. And you're like, well, you want to bet on it? And they're like, I don't want to bet on it. It turns out I'm not that sure. It's just something I like to say.
Yep. Some more. Mag dumps are now okay against white women. Okay, let me steel man the argument. It wasn't a mag dump, as this person knows, but let's steel man the argument that people were making. Okay, even if the first shot was justified, the fact there were 3 shots, including only the first one having evidence that went through the front shield, even if we accept that one was legal, the following 2 weren't. Now, the problem with this is the law is not going to back that up for multiple reasons. One, he doesn't even have to be in fear that his life still in jeopardy. Once he fears, the law is quite succinct on this, once he fears that this is someone using a deadly weapon in an act of violence, he is allowed to try to prevent that from escalating to other people as well. And so it would be justified. Second, it's absurd to think that what was the time frame that he fired these 3 shots, right? It's absurd to think that it's like, okay, shoot, now pause, reflect, where's the car now? Okay, now shoot, now pause, reflect, now that's not how things work, right? Once the first shot was deemed reasonable, the idea that he fired 2 more in rapid succession, I don't think is any argument whatsoever justify that this would then be murder based on the following 2 shots.
I mean, I think, look, there are situations where there could be a big enough time period, right? Like if you imagine like a crazy hypothetical, like he shot her, the car's rolling, and then he chases the car down and shoots again, right? Like,
right, yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine scenarios where clearly they're 2 separate events. But if you look at the video without slowing it down, you just watch it play out. This really looks like one event, right? He shoots, he's on the side of the car, he keeps shooting, and my understanding is, and I've never been a law enforcement officer, but from those I've spoken to, you're not trained to shoot one shot. You're trained to shoot to at least double tap, right? Like if you're going to discharge your weapon, you're going to discharge your weapon and make sure that the target is no longer a threat. So I think it was like, I don't have the exact figure, but I think it was like 0.7 seconds start to finish, something like that. So in order legally, they would have to prove that these were distinct events, whereas the default would be it's one continuous event and you have to treat it as one event. I think the arguments there are pretty thin. I think that it happens so fast, right? And I don't think there's a lot of time for him to have reassessed the situation between like the second and the third shot, for example. I think you're talking about a fraction of a second.
Yeah, I mean it's not a good argument, right? Of course, that's one of the arguments. Here's another one that I hear. Well, it's against department policy for him to walk in front of a car. Now, the first thing I'll say to this is he didn't really do that. He did walk in front of it and around it in a filming pattern. But actually, if you look, when she backed up, she also backed up at a slight angle. So like if this is him and here's the car facing this way, when she backs up, it kind of does this. And now the car is pointing more towards him based on that she backs and turns a little. But secondly, my understanding is this is complete irrelevance, right? Like, for example, it may be against department policy for an officer, against their recommendation for an officer to pull a suspected bank robber suspect over alone. But if he does and then gets shot and killed, I don't think you get to say, well, it was against department policy. The point is, even if he could be reprimanded, he didn't do anything illegal by being in front of her car, right? And by the way, I disagree it's against department policy anyways, but even if it was, it's not something illegal, and that doesn't then justify him not being able to defend himself if he feels deadly force is being applied against it.
Yeah, well, think about the Breonna Taylor situation. Remember that? They did a no-knock warrant. They broke the door down. The boyfriend didn't know they were cops, so started shooting, and then the cops are getting shot at, so they shoot back. Right? That the cops don't go to jail in that scenario. There is no, in America, we do not have it's called officer created jeopardy rule. If the officers create the jeopardy and then a deadly scenario ensues, the officers are not then disqualified from the protections given to police officers for using deadly force. And again, I mentioned the Barnes case earlier. In that case, it was a traffic stop. The guy starts pulling away, and the cop decided to jump on the car and put his feet on the sill, and he's holding onto the car, and the guy's driving. Right now, you could make a pretty good argument, like, well, maybe you shouldn't have done that.
That's bad, right?
Maybe that's just not like a super smart thing for a cop to do. But that's the situation he was in, and then the guy's driving recklessly and trying to knock him off the car, which is obviously very dangerous. He shoots the guy, and it wasn't like the court was like, well, you're automatically disqualified from the protection due to law enforcement officers for the use of reasonable force because you chose to jump on the car. And choosing to jump on the car is way, like in terms of like policy and like introducing risk, that's way riskier than walking in front of a car when you're trying to get a traffic stop, right? Like, or to stop the car from moving. So I don't think that legally holds any water is the honest truth. I think that like, even if you think he shouldn't have been in front of the car, I'm not sure why that would matter to the extent people say it does.
Yeah, it's just, to me, it's like, I think people have an emotional reaction. Look, I also have an emotional reaction. I don't want to see this woman killed, right? And I think a lot of people are predisposed to disliking ICE, whether it be through policy prescriptions or they're just like libertarians that don't particularly like law enforcement, whatever the case may be. But I think any attempt at an objective viewing of this shows that this shooting was not something that particularly raises red flags any more than probably dozens of law enforcement shootings a month that I think would be more close than this to being illegitimate, and almost none of them are ever charged. And so the hyper focus on this, I think, let's assume best faith intentions for the people in my chat that are saying, this was clearly murder or whatever. I think that you're being too emotional, and the facts show that this just isn't the case. But an awful lot of people wanted an excuse. They wanted this. They wanted a martyr because they don't like these laws being enforced. And this gives them an excuse to say, now we have the moral high ground to go out and stop ICE from enforcing this because they're murderers. That's what's going on. Corey Schuler says, Alex Jones 2014 is crying. Cool. I don't give a shit. I don't rely on appeals to authority like people like you. Now, it's interesting, right, that you want to say that I'm appealing to sort of law enforcement while you continue to appeal to what Alex Jones 2014 would say. I don't give a shit. Go check out one of his streams.
Well, and look, I think you made an important point, which is that one thing that's happening that's very dangerous right now is people are taking the position, especially in these kind of like counterinsurgency type groups who are trying to do these counter protests, that if you don't like what the federal government is doing, that the federal government doesn't have authority over you. And that's crazy. Like, if you really think about what Renee was doing, she was driving a car back and forth to impede law enforcement. And then on the most charitable possible interpretation of what she did, she then tried to flee federal authorities when they were seeking to arrest her, initiating a high-speed chase. Right? That's the best possible explanation of what she's doing. That's crazy. That's crazy. Like, if you go back to the Civil Rights Act, and like I was saying, the Civil Rights period and the rich history of civil disobedience, like, it's not like people were in the South were like going to the diner and sitting in the white section, and then when the cops came, like breaking out bats and fighting the cops and trying to resist arrest, and because they would have all been killed. Like, that's not how you do civil disobedience, because once you start using force against law enforcement officers, these things will happen from time to time, tragic as though they may be. What they did is they got arrested. And I said at the beginning, and that's what I keep saying to people, if you're going to engage in civil disobedience, you have to understand that arrest is part of it. That's the end of the day. Have a lawyer, retain a lawyer, let them solve these problems for you at the end of the day, but you're going to get arrested. That's what happens at the end of civil disobedience. And if you think that's not what happens, then maybe civil disobedience isn't for you, right? Yeah. Like this is like you're playing with live ammo here, literally, when you're out there trying to impede law enforcement and trying to prevent them from doing their job. And you have a right to do it. This is America, but you're going to get arrested.
Yeah. And, the other thing is, right, like people said, what do you mean they wanted a martyr? This is exactly, in my opinion, what these anti-ICE people wanted. They're intentionally putting people in danger, telling people as a matter of sort of your strategy, get in harm's way, try to obstruct ICE. You know that leads to confrontations with law enforcement. You know that law enforcement is armed. You know then if you're instructing people to flee, that has the chance to lead to a lethal situation. And if you set that situation up 1,000 times, probably there are good odds that one of those are going to lead to the officer discharging his weapon, and lawfully so. And then they get what they want. They wanted to be able to say, by the way, this is the same tactic, in my opinion, that they used under the Floyd riots, right? They kept allowing these riots to occur, mayors standing down, and then they wanted Trump to send in the National Guard so they could say, look, this man's a fascist. Right? It's the same thing here. These people continued to act like there wasn't a problem. We saw, I've been covering this for months. We saw vehicles that were blockading ICE. In Chicago, there was a case like 3 months ago where we actually had the 911 call, right? Where like the behind the scenes officer chatter was, we're not supposed to intervene on the behalf of ICE, says the Chicago police, as ICE was being boxed in and cars were slammed. Footage after footage. There was one where a U-Haul was backing up into ICE. We see this occurring, and the left stood by silently. They said, no, this is peaceful protest. And all the while I said, inevitably this will end up poorly. And that's what they want. They want something like this so they can say, do you see the evil fascists? Now we need to stop. And that's exactly what people are taking the bait on.
Yeah, and that's why the advice that's being given isn't sane advice, right? Like, again, back to the civil rights movement, the whole purpose of peaceful protest which is, what the hallmark of the civil rights movement was, to maintain the moral high ground and avoid these situations, right? But like, I do think that, like, there are people who benefit from her martyrdom, and as a result, there's going to be some very bad advice given. So I'm not like, look, if you don't agree with me and Rob, like, that's fine. Like, if politics is fun, I like arguing about politics. That's all great. I am just urging you that if you're going to engage in this kind of protest behavior, like, go in with an actual plan that will keep you safe so you get to go home. Like, you cannot go in and involve deadly weapons in your protest. You cannot go in and resist arrest. You cannot go in and attempt to flee at the end. Like, these are things that could have very serious negative consequences.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. You shouldn't impede law enforcement, but if you are going to do that, then when you get arrested, you have to assume that. Have your day in court. Hey, you may well win. Maybe there will be enough cultural and judicial outrage that they'll rule against. Maybe you'll get a sympathetic jury. Whatever. Maybe you'll file a lawsuit and you'll become a millionaire like some of these BLM. I hate all of that, but you'll be alive and the officers will be alive, right? Like, so don't escalate the situation. If you're going to, particularly if you know you're committing a crime, you just think the law is unjust. I'm going to impede law enforcement. That's bad. But if you're going to do that, understand you're going to get arrested. Don't escalate the situation to where violence becomes acceptable. And so, I just think that it's amazing, though, that we have this sort of Scott Adams 2 movies where you could watch this and I'm like, this is clear cut that the officer was well within his rights. And there were just as many people certain that, like, this officer is clearly a murderer. And it's shocking that this is where we're at. But for me,
and that's the point that got me pissed off. And I know that, Pisco just does what he does, but, like, when you call it a murder, right, that's very different. That's very different. Like, like you can say, like, shit, this seems like a problem. Like, you could even look at this and be like, God, is there a way we could train these officers differently?
It's reckless, right?
But when you start saying that this was a murder, now you're saying that, like, you're saying that the government's just out there fucking killing people for no reason, right? It's just premeditated murder. And that's clearly not what happened. It's just clearly not what happened. And that strikes me as a really callous political ploy, right? To just to kind of mislabel something because it advances the ball for you politically. And I think ultimately we have to get a little bit more resistant to this shit. Like, you have to be willing to say, like, okay, like, I get what the PR game here is, but let's be honest. Like, maybe you hate to shoot, maybe some people think it was justified, but legally, there's just not a good argument here that this is a murder. And almost no lawyer is going to tell you otherwise, Pisco being the notable exception. So I think that we need to have our heads on our shoulders about this sort of thing. And I think it is an interesting parallel to the stuff that I think we're going to talk about next with Don Lemon, because for years there have been protests at abortion facilities where people were arrested and thrown in jail for a hell of a lot less, because a law was passed that said you can't protest in those areas. You can't impede at all. And to say that warrants serious jail time, whereas taking cars and boxing in ICE agents, that's fine. That's a peaceful protest. That's a wild dichotomy.
Yeah, and we will move on there. I'll just say, last thing I'll say on this before we move to this, which is obviously connected, is all you have to do is imagine for a second. Like, take the legality out of it for a second, and I'll talk about this more in my show tonight. But if we had a situation, for whatever reason, that a Democrat was in office and his feds were doing something, perhaps they pass a new law that says, hey, you know what? You're not allowed to own AR-15s. Right? And it passes legal muster, and that's the law of the land. And so all of a sudden you have federal enforcement agents that are going around the country, right? And they're arresting people that have ARs, right? That they suspect have ARs. And imagine in right-wing cities that there's just a revolt. We are going to impede these officers. We're going to stop them. We're going to dox these officers. We're going to hunt them down. How quick do you think that would be dealt with by the left? How quick do you think it'd be dealt with? It would be insane. This would be deemed an insurrection. Every politician that paid any lip service to these people whatsoever would be immediately investigated. We see this. We know that that's what happened after the January 6th. They were literally getting documents, phone calls, records, etc., from all of these congressmen, from the president, from the vice president, from his lawyers. And so the idea that we just have to accept, in my opinion, every time that we have sort of a right-wing president, that the left gets out and gets to riot and gets to challenge law enforcement over and over and over again, and we're like, it's civil disobedience, it's okay. But the one time that there's any violence on the right, oh my goodness, it's the biggest deal in the world. I would love to see a Venn diagram of the people that say that this woman, Renee Good, that was using a deadly weapon was an innocent victim that was murdered, and see what those people say about Ashley Babbitt, who did not have a deadly weapon, who they all said she had it coming. She had that officer feared, even though she had no weapon, even though there was no reason, right? But the circumstances were. So it just, the tribalism is absolute insanity. And I'm afraid that it's going to lead to more things like our next story. I could play some of the clips that people like, but you've probably seen it. Don Lemon was embedded with some people that went into a church and started to harass the people in the church, yell at them, scream at them, as the people were shocked, including Don Lemon talking to the pastor or minister, whoever it was, in the auspices of, I guess now they're trying to say there was suspicion that the pastor worked for ICE, or, just challenging these comfortable white people in church. Morally, I think we could both say that this is egregious. And optically, I think it looks really bad. But legally, there have been people talking about this act called the FACE Act. And this was the same thing, as you correctly say, that charged people that were just doing things like silently praying outside of abortion clinics. Do you think that the actions of these people and or Don Lemon violated the FACE Act, and should there be charges brought because of it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can let me share my screen, because it's going to be easier to show people what exactly this is. But this is the FACE Act. It's 18 U.S.C. 248, freedom of access to clinic entrances. And where this came from is that there was a period where there was a lot of protests outside of abortion facilities, particularly on the pro-life side. And people were very upset about it, especially on the left. But then the right said, well, this has to be symmetrical. You can't have a law that just protects abortion facilities. If you're going to protect abortion facilities and you're going to say you can't impede abortion facilities, then they get special protection. Then we want places of worship to get special protection. And that was the compromise that was reached. So it's a pretty unique law, because places of worship and abortion clinics specifically are actually protected from protest in a way that almost nowhere else is. And if you see what it says, prohibited activities by force or threat of force or physical obstruction intentionally injures, intimidates, or interferes, just interferes, or attempts to interfere with any person because that person is using their reproductive health services, right? But then it says the exact same thing down here, because if someone's trying to exercise the First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of religious worship. So it is a crime if by force or threat of force or physical obstruction, you intimidate, interfere, or attempt to interfere with somebody exercising their First Amendment rights to religious worship at a place of worship. Now, if you burst in and you're yelling and screaming and you prevent the sermon from happening, are you intentionally interfering or attempting to interfere with the religious observances? I mean, it's really hard to say how that's not an obvious yes. Now, query, is this a good law? I mean, there's some First Amendment questions that come to mind, but this is what the law says. It's not a particularly tough call. Now, this, in the case of a first offense, you can't get more than a year of jail time. So this is what's called a Class A misdemeanor for first-time offenders. In a second offense, it goes up. So this by itself would just be a misdemeanor. But are they guilty of this misdemeanor? I think certainly yes. Certainly yes. And we can maybe we should talk about this for a second. But there's ways that they could charge this where it wouldn't just be a misdemeanor. They could upcharge this and add extra years on it if they want to. But on the text of the law, I don't think this is a particularly tough call.
Yeah, I agree. Now we'll talk about those upcharges. We will. Let me say this is the problem, and this is something that I've talked about a lot. In the legal context, people want to talk about whataboutism, but one of the things that I think I'm just right on is the intent of our legal system sort of comes from like English common law, and like, sort of the core of it is equal justice for all, right? Now, we obviously understand that that's impossible, and there are institutional advantages to like being connected or rich or having a better attorney. We'll never have a perfect system, but the idea behind the system is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So there are all sorts of things that I don't like that are in our law, but once you see them being applied against one political side quite frequently, then you have to say, fair enough, it needs to be applied to the other side. There were people that spent a year in jail or 9 months in jail for literally just silently praying on a sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic. That was deemed to be interfering with the services that those people were trying to get. So actually, imagine if the difference was breaking into the abortion clinic and screaming at people. Now, if you got a year just from silently praying outside, why wouldn't you receive something to this degree? In addition, the fact that I don't like this law doesn't mean that I still don't think it should be illegal, even if it's just trespassing or something to that effect. I don't want a system with let's maybe something the left would like. I don't want me and someone like that shares my religious views to be able to break into a mosque or a synagogue and just start screaming, "Fuck you! You're wrong! You're going to burn in hell!" Like, why should I be allowed to do that continually? Why shouldn't that be something that it's like, no, you can't do that? I don't know that we need a special law like the FACE Act. Maybe that would be something that could be accomplished through normal trespassing laws, etc. But clearly, we should agree societally that's against sort of the spirit of the First Amendment. And yet, we now see the people that were hyper fixated on protecting abortion clinics, even to the point where you couldn't pray silently outside, are saying this is totally fair game. In fact, Keith Ellison himself, the Attorney General of Minnesota, just came out today, right before our show, and said, First Amendment, baby, you're allowed to do this.
Well, I mean, look, I think you nail on the head there. The reason I don't like this law is exactly what you said. People were arrested for silently praying, and that doesn't strike me as the sort of thing you should be arrested for. Now, whether you need the law at all, I mean, look, if you go into a church and they ask you to leave and you don't leave, you're trespassing, right? There's all kinds of non-specific legal remedies that would solve these sorts of problems, and I think would be adequate tools. But Congress, in their wisdom, decided to pass this law. And this law does say that, if you're interfering or even attempting to interfere with abortion clinics or places of worship, then you're liable. And I mean, if to your point, like the Biden administration charged people, I'm not sure if the prayer thing was during the Biden years or not, but the Biden administration did charge, I think, 4 or 5 people under the FACE Act for interfering with abortion services. And so this is not like some antiquity law that never gets used. It was used really recently. And bursting in and having a protest inside the church in the middle of a service that's wild. That's wild behavior. That's not a public place. That's not a place of public accommodation where you have the right to freely protest in the street or something like this. Like, this is a totally different situation. So I don't know what they were thinking. This seems like just a terrible, terrible idea. But I think it's the point we were talking about earlier where they say, like, well, we hate ICE, so everything we do is justified. And the pastor of this church seems to be affiliated with ICE, so we are morally allowed just to break the law and we don't have to care about that. And that's a very dangerous mentality. I think this is a slam dunk case. And unlike other instances, like I know, like when they charge Comey or Letitia James, there's all these conversations about political prosecutions. Here, it's like, well, what do you mean political prosecution? Like Biden charged people under this exact same law for less. Like this is just routine law enforcement at this point. This isn't even a political prosecution. This is just like that's a flagrant violation of the law.
Yeah, and I mean, can you talk for a minute about the possibility of sort of increasing the severity of the offense? We could bring that up if you want. So you said that there are ways that they could possibly go further.
Yeah. So this is going to be, I think I told on one of Andrew's threads on X, I said this would be the funniest possible outcome, because what we're looking at now, actually, what's funny? This law if you remember back in the debate, one of the things I cooked Pisco on is I said the Civil Rights Act of 1866 supports my position. And then in 1870, they passed the Enforcement Acts. And the Enforcement Acts also support my position. This is one of the Enforcement Acts. So this is actually something I was looking at in the debate prep. But this is called Conspiracy Against Rights. People call it the KKK Act, because what they did back in 1870 is they were trying to find ways to prevent and punish people who were conspiring to stop people from exercising their constitutional rights. Like, okay, we've given the newly freed slaves all these rights, but the KKK keeps showing up and saying, if you vote, we're going to lynch you. So how do we police that? How do we stop that? And what they did is they created a law that makes it illegal for people to conspire to prevent you from exercising your constitutional rights. And if you look at it, it's a little bit old-fashioned language, but it's not unclear. If two or more people, well, there were definitely two or more people, conspire, it sure seemed like they were conspiring. They were working together, right? And they say to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate, we'll come back to that, any person from the enjoyment of rights or privilege secured to them by the Constitution or the laws of the United States, right? That's the crime. If two people conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate in order to stop you from using your constitutional rights. And they've been very clear. I think intimidate fits pretty easily, actually. Like if you're in a church and you're yelling and screaming and you won't let people pray, I think you actually are intimidating them. Certainly you're threatening them. But this also, the Supreme Court in a number of cases has said that this can be read as hinder. If you're hindering their rights, you don't have to stop them from getting to the voting poll. But if you make it really hard because you block off all the roads and you're only letting white people through, so it takes black people an extra hour because they got to go the long way around. You didn't stop them, you just hindered them. That's also something that is actionable under this. So they hindered, they intimidated, and the constitutional right is your right to express your religion, your right to religious expression in a house of worship. And if you do that, this can be up to 10 years. So this can have serious jail time attached to it. And this is not like a novel legal theory. In the Biden years, the way they charged this for people who were protesting outside of abortion clinics is they would charge the FACE Act violation, and then they'd say, and all of you were conspiring against the right to an abortion, and therefore you also violated 18 USC 241, conspiracy against rights. And that takes it out of the misdemeanor category into the felony category. So this is not like a hypothetical. This has been done in the abortion context. I will say that the converse has almost never been true. The right has almost never charged people for violating these laws about churches. It's almost, I think, like I was trying to find stats on it earlier, but it's something like 90% plus has always been about abortion clinics. But it's the same legal theory. It's the same legal theory that Biden's DOJ used. I don't see why it wouldn't apply here. So there is actually a chance that someone like Don Lemon gets arraigned and charged with a serious felony as a result of this behavior.
Yeah, and here's what's crazy, and this blew my mind. So I was reading this feed of this guy, Christkirk, DC, and it's a church in DC. It's one of the people, and he's like, some of the same people that were here are constantly at our church in DC. And what they'll do is, it's not that they're coming in most of the time, it's that they stand right outside it and yell and scream at people. And now I was shocked because I'm like, wow, that's basically what the abortion people that were arrested. It's not even that they went into the abortion facility. It was that they were hindering, intimidating, etc. people attempting to enter or attempting to exit, right? And that was enough to be able to charge these people. So I wonder how many times we've seen people protesting outside of churches. It's quite frequent. And the letter of the law is you can't do that. And the right, as always, in my opinion, castrated, and they're like, well, we won't charge those laws. The left makes no such considerations. They're more than happy to say, no, our church is the abortion clinic, and you can't interfere with that. So I find that interesting. Now, I want to ask you, though, specifically about this. Does Don Lemon himself have a case of defense that, no, this doesn't apply to him because he wasn't part of the mob doing this. He was merely a journalist that was covering it?
I think here's how that would play out. there's no journalist exception. Like, you don't get a free pass because you're a journalist. So like that at the start, you have to say that. But remember, there's two different laws that we are talking about. The first one just says, were you interfering with the with their religious worship? And that's the misdemeanor, the FACE Act. What I saw of Lemon, where he was like trying to interview people, and he was he did seem like he was interfering. That seemed like interfering. Now, we said this before. I mean, God, if people praying outside is interfering, that's a pretty low bar, right? So it seems like probably there. Where his argument is better is as to 241, the felony charge, because what he's going to say isn't that he's immune because he's a journalist. He's going to say, I wasn't part of the conspiracy. That law captures people who conspire, which means agree that they're going to go do this thing to prevent you from having your constitutional right to religious exercise. And he's going to say, I wasn't part of that conspiracy. I didn't agree to do that. I saw what was happening and I went to document it. And I was certainly there, but I wasn't part. I didn't have in the legal terms, it's called specific intent. I didn't intend to stop them from doing their religious exercise. I just intended to document it. That would be the defense. And it's going to come down to a credibility question. You know, a jury would have to say, like, well, do I think that he really was doing that? Or do I think that he actually was kind of joining in and kind of free riding on it? And I don't believe that he, that he didn't intend to stop people from enjoying the sermon.
Well, and if you were his attorney, I don't think he's doing himself any favors. First off, right, you had him both preceding and following, sort of being very chummy with these people, like hugging them, saying these are the sorts of things that are needed. That's not good. It sort of goes to like, he's more of an active participant than just a dispassionate person who's filming it. Then he's on today with several people, and he's saying things like, you know, these are comfortable white people and that it's white supremacists. This isn't good because, like, this isn't the language of someone's just like, look, I'm just reporting what I saw. This sounds like someone who is at least saying, I agree with the motivations of the people that broke the law. And seeing as how you were there as well and interviewing the pastor and all of this stuff, it looks like Don Lemon should probably keep his mouth shut. From a legal perspective, it's almost like I believe he once arrested. That's what I think's going on. Again, this martyrdom. If you're irrelevant like Don Lemon and if you've lost your job on network television and all this, well, what better way to get back in the limelight than catch a charge? It's the new civil rights movement. I'm unjustly charged, blah, blah, blah. But I think from a defense attorney standpoint, he's making a huge mistake because he's making the case against himself more likely to occur.
Yeah, that's a common lawyer sentiment, which is like, oh my God, client, shut the fuck up. Oh my God, client, shut the lawyers often want their client to say less, and this is why, because sometimes they say stuff that just makes your life real hard. But then also just to put a bow on the legal thing, it's not like it's uncommon in a conspiracy case for a defendant to say, I didn't agree to that. I'm not part of the conspiracy. They all say that, right? So the law basically says that it's the jury looks at all the facts and the circumstances, and they can make an inference about whether or not you agreed to do this thing, right? So the fact that if he comes in and says, well, I didn't tell them I was going to do it. I gave him a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I got nudge, got my camera out, and then I wasn't part of it. I was just there. And I wasn't stopping the sermon. I was just trying to interview the pastor that they were harassing during the middle of it. It's very possible that a jury is going to see that and say, just call BS, right? And statements like those don't help. So I think he does have he has some real legal jeopardy here. Now, to your point, he might appreciate that. That might be good for his career because he certainly isn't on CNN anymore. So maybe this is what he's looking to do. But I wouldn't be sleeping well if I was him. But man, Don Lemon, a gay black man being arrested and charged under the KKK Act, and we're having the conversation on Martin Luther King Day. This is the most ironic timeline.
It's peak. It is. It's definitely peak. It definitely is. Real quick, I know we're running out of time, but on this idea of press, it's complicated because I think we understand the legal ramifications of going hard at the press. And there are times where the press breaks the law, but morally you understand it. Like if the press gets a source, a government whistleblower, sometimes the government tries to pressure, using the law, the member of the press. And, I stayed up for the press in those cases. However, I think we're increasingly seeing, particularly with these left-wing riots and organizations that I would call Antifa, there's a lot of people that just shout, I'm the press, I'm the press, I'm the press. Like when you see things like exchanges between, officers trying to enforce the law in the middle of a riot, and then these people get involved and they say, I'm press, I'm press. And then 3 minutes later, you see them on footage like throwing a punch at someone. Do you think there needs to be sort of a look at like protections from the press, and like, is there a specific like criteria that's used in the law that's like, just because you have press credentials doesn't mean that your actions you're taking in the moment are, under the umbrella of protected as a member of the press?
I mean, honestly, a lot of that's just discretion. People say like, "Oh, I'm a member of the press. I'm never going to turn over my source." That's not. There's no legal protection for press source. Like if a judge tells you to turn over your source and you don't do it, you go to jail. You know what I mean? Like it's not like lawyer-client confidentiality or marital privilege. Like there are legal privileges that exist where you can't make someone give up their confidences. But like that's just kind of like we understand why they have confidential sources, and we tend not to press the issue unless we have to, because we think it's good for society for the press to do what they do. But that's not even really a legal rule, and similarly, the press don't have any magical privilege to trespass. They don't have any magical privilege to violate the law. I think oftentimes we go easy on them because we understand that society's better for what they're doing. But if they cross the line and they're violating the law, they can be charged just like anybody else. And this one, I mean, we'll see what the prosecutors want to do, but looking at the law and looking at the actions that happen, this is actually a pretty clear-cut charge. I would say this is one of the most clear-cut charges we've seen in a kind of the ICE protest context. Like this is a pretty easy one, down the middle case. So I would be unsurprised if they really do lay charges on this whole group of people. And one of your, I think it's, I can't tell. Oh no, it's one of mine. Interesting point. Lessons 3616 mentioned that he was tipped off by a protester who was live streaming, and that's an awful fine line, right? Like, what's the difference between I was tipped off and then went there to record it versus I was tipped off, so I went there to participate in it? That's a very fine line, and that's the difference between the 241 conviction.
Yeah, I mean, think of it in something that's less politically charged. Like if I'm a member of the press and people contact us and say, show up here, we're going to rob a bank, come with us and document it. I don't have protections as I'm telling the bank teller, no, stay down, don't move. I can't later then be like, oh, but I was a member of the press. I was tipped off and I showed up, and like people are going to say, no, at that point you're helping with this crime, whether that was your intention or not.
If I was the prosecutor, Rob, that's the argument I would make. I would say, look, like what was the goal of this conspiracy to, in order to stop people from worshiping in this church? Was their goal really just to shut down that church that day? No, their goal was to humiliate the pastor of the church. Their goal was to try to make the church accountable and to try to make the people feel bad about attending church in this place. And in that context, the press and Don Lemon was a critical part of the conspiracy, right? Like, how are you going to humiliate the pastor publicly if there's no cameras there? How are you going to make it clear that you think morally no one should attend this church and these are bad people, which is, I think, what they were doing, if you don't have the cameras and you don't have the press there? So I actually think inviting him there, if I was a prosecutor, this is the argument I'd make, that they were doing it because it was a key part of the conspiracy. It's actually worse than the bank robbery example, where the camera's incidental. In fact, the footage is actually harmful to the bank robbery attempt. Here, I think the footage is actually part and parcel. It's what they were doing. So I don't think it's a bad argument. I think there's a very reasonable chance that there could be a conviction here.
Yeah, I agree. And then once it occurs, if it happens, which I won't hold my breath, but if it does happen, predictably, the left's going to lose their mind. They're going to say that this is fascist, that we're attacking members of the press now, that it's anti-First Amendment. It's sad. It's sort of the same self-fulfilling prophecy that I think is part and parcel to the strategy of the left. We've talked about this in the panel debate we did on the Somalian refugees. And one of the things you talked about was like, look, like or dislike ICE, one of the reasons that they're so visible in these areas is because these are areas that stop cooperating. They no longer have this cooperation. And so what happens is that leads to escalations, which then the left says, see, the escalation proves why they're bad. We keep kicking, I saw someone say this in the chat, we keep kicking the dog and eventually it bit back. See, the dog's dangerous. And so it's sad that I see this as another escalation, that it's going to be like, well, if you say, look, we don't want this to be a martyr event, Don Lemon, tisk tisk, don't do this again. The rest of you need to stop doing this, right? It'll just encourage them to do it more. And then once you arrest, it's, aha, see, you're anti-First Amendment, you're anti-free speech.
I mean, I do think that's what it is. And this is what you see all over the place, right? Like, this is the common tactic. You know, it's like when people, one of the criticisms, and this is a wild analogy, I'll grant that it's wild, but when people talk about Hamas, one of the things they often say is they're like, well, who benefits when children in Palestine die? Hamas. It's their PR strategy. It doesn't benefit Israel. It doesn't benefit the people of Hamas. It's horrible for the people of Hamas, the people of Palestine. The only people it benefits is Hamas politically, because there's an optical win, right? And I do think that is a common tactic, right? Where you create martyrdom situations, and then when it happens, when there is enforcement, when there is use of force in the Renee case, or here if their charges are brought, then you get to fight a PR fight about it. But in this one, I actually think they kind of fucked up, because here the law's like oddly clear. I don't think these were people who like knew what the law was and were baiting it. I think that they legitimately forgot that the law applies to churches as well as abortion facilities, because nobody ever gets charged on the church side. It's always on the abortion side, right? Like, this has been, we've had many cases, like 50 cases, where people outside of abortion centers were charged, but churches, it almost never happens. So I think this was just actually ignorance. Like, they really didn't know what the law was, but that's not a defense.
Well, it's even worse than that. I agree with you. But even aside from that, this is an optical nightmare, right? Like, look, as despicable, in my opinion, and unscrupulous as it is to have like pregnant ladies or people with their children in front of ICE, right? I understand the optics of it. Now, if ICE fights back, oh my goodness, look what you just did, right? Who does this help optically? I mean, there are literally images of children crying as like their father is consoling them as they're screaming at people in a church that's seemingly unconnected to all of this. And like, the American people still, regardless of what you think of the brand of Christianity, many of them are still self-identified Christians. And I think that there's a lot of people, even that aren't Christians, that would be like, no, this is no good. This is too far. So to make the fundamental mistake of breaking the law, if you're going to break the law, then you have it like the sit-in type situation, right? We're doing it peacefully, but breaking the law to prove a point. You don't go out and harass children, right? And break the law in a clear-cut way and then have it enforced and then try to claim the victim.
Well, and I think this is, I know some people in chat are dubious that charges are going to get brought, but politically, and charges often have a political calculus. Like, let's be honest, there's a political dimension to most of what the government does. But if we're talking politics, this is a fight the right should want to pick, right? Like, if the right's not going to defend families in churches, what the fuck are they for?
Yep.
Right? Like honestly, what are you for at that point, right? So, and if you can't win on that optical basis, you've just lost. So I think that this is a fight to pick, where you say like, no, like, whatever you think about ICE, you want to have your sit-ins, you want to do your thing. Okay, you're not going into churches and haranguing pastors during services. You're not telling kids that their church fathers are evil men that can't be trusted. Like, you're just not doing that. And if you do, we are going to do something about it. And that, if you can't turn that into a winning political message, I don't know what the fuck's wrong with you, because that's a clearly winning political message.
And this is what gets me, like, look, I understand Look, and it points to the disingenuous. I guess if I'm trying to be neutral, I could say people on the right do this as well. But the silence was deafening of elected Democratic officials yesterday about this, right? And it was like, okay, they're shaping what they're going to say. And then to see the top law enforcement agent in Minnesota, Keith Ellison, come out today and basically be like, look, this is First Amendment. What a terrible look. What a horrible unforced air. Because I think that, like, it'd be one thing if you leave your online jokesters, go ahead and say, this is good. But to have, like, a prominent Democrat in the area, like Keith Ellison being like, no, I think this is solid. I think it's an optical nightmare for them. So I hope you're right. This leads to the calculus of prosecuting. Yeah.
And look, man, like with the First Amendment point, I would be on his side if they were protesting outside. Like when people got arrested for praying outside abortion clinics, I thought that was a First Amendment problem. I think if you're having a protest outside a church and you have signs up that say like, hey, the pastor's an ICE agent, I'm a First Amendment guy. Like I think you'd have a good First Amendment argument, but that's not what they did. They stormed the church. This is like, that's not protected activity. The church is not a public location for your protests. It's just not. This is a different thing. Like you can't go into places that you don't have a legal right to be and then protest. That's not it. We saw the same thing with the Columbia students, right? Where it's like, okay, you want to have a protest on the lawn? Sure, that's one thing. But if you start blocking off buildings, that's another thing. Here, they crossed a line where I don't even think a First Amendment, even a First Amendment maximalist, isn't going to look at this and go, oh yeah, for the First Amendment means you get to storm churches. Like, what are we talking about at that point?
I mean, think going back to the civil rights, like the KKK Act, civil rights legislation. Imagine in the Jim Crow South, if this is the way it's allowed to be, if just a bunch of like anti-black people just storm into black churches every week and be like, nope, we refuse to allow you to pray. We refuse to allow you to worship here. Rightfully, people would be like, this is outrageous. You can't do that. That's a clear violation. There's so much to talk about this. One other thing I'll say is it's interesting to me, like that concept of hindering or interfering with, right? Take college campuses when you have right-wing speakers. And you see this all the time. They'll pull the fire alarm. They'll show up and like do the heckler's veto, or they'll just scream, or they'll have bullhorns and not. It's amazing how like weaponized this concept of free speech has become on the left, where they're able to say things like, well, it's free speech for us to come and not allow you to pray and not allow you to worship. We can come and scream in your face and not allow. That's our free speech. And yet the alternative would never fly. Like it's frustrating to watch it get interpreted that way by people that I think know better. And then what really is going on is they say we're morally virtuous and you're not. So kick rocks. The rules don't apply the same to us as you because we're good guys and you're bad guys.
Yeah, and look, people have some real bad understanding of the First Amendment. Like, if you're in an auditorium and you start like heckling people, and then the staff, I've seen this happen when Amy Coney Barrett was speaking at universities. Yeah. She got heckled quite a lot, and the president of the university stood up and said he read the law. He's like, this is the law that says in this state I'm allowed to clear you out. If you're hindering the speech, it's going to happen. And then they got cleared out. The First Amendment doesn't protect you. You don't have because you don't have a right to be in the auditorium if the people who own the auditorium don't want you there, right? You don't have the right to pull a fire alarm like illegally. That's often against the law. Like the First Amendment does a lot of things, but it does not give you the right to violate laws unless those laws are preventing you from using your speech in a way that is protected. And you don't have a right to be in this church. You certainly don't have a right to be in this church and heckle the pastor and break up the sermon. Like, this is just absolutely not something that is acceptable. And it is funny that it's a First Amendment thing, because the First Amendment also protects freedom of religion. And so the idea that like, oh yeah, well, your speech is great, that's why we can heckle pastors and churches. No, absolutely not. So I actually, I was skeptical at first, and I started looking at this. Now I'm hoping they bring charges. I'm hoping they bring charges because I would like this to stop. I think people need to know that there's some line, and if that's the theme of this show, right? You want to protest ICE? Don't do it with a deadly weapon. You want to protest ICE? Don't go inside people's places of worship. have some decency, have some respect, have some understanding of what the boundaries are, and just protest like anybody else in American history would.
Yep, totally agreed. So, all right, that's going to wrap up the show. What do you have going on? We'll be back in 2 weeks. Any big debates, big shows coming up that you want to plug?
No, this is I've been a little bit quieter after scheduling a bunch of stuff back to back to back. I'm trying to get on with I have no idea how to pronounce him. He's a drama streamer, Just Talk. So I'll be
J
talking with him.
Stock, yeah.
I'll be chatting with him sometime in the future. And if you think I'm wrong about birthright citizenship, I'm going on Sarah's show on Thursday with an open panel. So if you think that Pisco just didn't have it. He just didn't have it that night. You think you can take the crown? That's the day to do it. But be warned, it won't work. So you can try, but it'll be fun for all of us if you do. But it's not going to go well for you. So if you want to do that, check out Sarah's show on Thursday.
Look, I think you are the first ever victor at Word War debate, right? You're undefeated in judge debates against Pisco, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean,
2 for 2
it's looking pretty good. So yeah, I hope I look forward to that. If people like sort of disagree with you, having a chance to go on and talk to you about it. I'm going to be streaming right after this, so we're going to be rating over on YouTube right to that stream. But it's been a blast as always, man, and I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Rob. And Rob, again, thank you for including me in Word War. I had a lot of fun, and it was fun hanging out with you. And I know you and I have had some fun talking shit about Pisco tonight, and I'll keep doing that. But let your fans know that Rob can absolutely go down the middle, totally fair, running the event Rob, not partisan Rob, right? And like Rob was going out of his way to be gracious and to make sure that the event went well, and he did a great job. So thank you, Rob.
Well, thank you. I thought your debate was the highlight of the show, and the fact that you guys not only took it on remarkably short notice, but also as we were working out some of the kinks, like you briefly mentioned, look, you basically had to rewrite your opening statement like 3 times because of what we were doing on the production end. So I can't thank you guys enough. It was, you guys did an excellent job. And it was also fun to hang out. By the way, I got a nice steak out of the deal as well. So we had a nice dinner. So
there you go. And hey, man, the opening got better every time I rewrote it. So in a sense, having to rewrite it was a blessing. Pain in the ass, but a blessing.
All right. We will see you all 2 Mondays from now. We may start doing it every Monday if our schedules open up. I know we both had a lot of Word War, and plus you took a lot of debates and stuff here recently. So we'll see. It's something we're talking about. I know there's no shortage of legal topics. That we know for sure. So, all right, man. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Rating over to me. As always, guys, have a good one.
Cheers, Rob.